Utsav Lal, thank you so much. Welcome to the School of Bass podcast. And really, really means a lot. You're doing this, talking to me, making time to talk to me. How are you doing? How are things in Boston right now? Have you been fine health wise?
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. Things are good. I've been living in New York for the last
Oh, you're in New York. I'm
two,
sorry.
three years now. I finished school in Boston and then moved down here because Boston is it's like a very transitional place. It's like the only people who move to Boston and then stay in Boston are people who get teaching jobs in Boston. And it feels like there's never like this big static scene over there. It's always whoever, and it's a city with like maybe 10 nice venues to play at and 8,000 music students all trying to get gigs. So um it's a strange place. It's one of those places that's like really pretty on the surface level, but after like a year or two you kind of like you're just itching to get out because there's no like cohesion anywhere. Everyone just comes, gets what they want, and then they go.
Yeah.
Whereas
So, do you, when you say there are only people who stay in Boston are people who want to teach, um, there is this period where people finish their graduation and then immediately start teaching. What are your thoughts on that? Is it something all right to do, or one should gain some more experience? Whether they teach in Boston or they teach elsewhere, what is your take on that? Should teachers have more playing experience rather than education experience to give forward to their students?
I don't know. I can't really critique that because that's what I did. Because if you're an international student and you go and study in the US, what you get after you finish your course is 1 year of work experience, where you can stay here and do things. And chances are, unless you're very, very lucky, you're not going to earn money, be able to like survive just playing gigs. The whole industry is so messed up now that that's that's rare to do. So almost everyone ends up teaching, and it's obviously the longer you've been teaching, the more effective you can be. But um, I don't think it's necessarily bad because you also have to teach for a long time to get better at it. Um, you're not going to like start off with 15 years of experience teaching. And like even when I teach myself, like stuff that I was talking about 4 or 5 years ago is like, I'm like cringing and saying that wasn't the most helpful thing to say over there. But I do like it with like the school that I studied at. There were a couple of courses dedicated to teaching how to teach. And like, there was in particular one guy called Warren Sanders, who's actually a Kayal vocalist. I forget who he studied with, someone in Pune, but he spent like decades in India. And he taught, I took 2 classes of his. One was called Improvisation and Teaching, which was about teaching how to improvise and also how to improvise teaching, where Warren's main thing is there's no such thing as a stupid student. If they can't get something, it's your fault as a teacher, and you have to find as many ways of making sure they get it. And if they still don't get it, you have failed as a teacher. And he says his experience in that came from being a really stupid student, where it took him way longer to get than anyone else. And he loves teaching people who can't get things because that's what he gets out of it. He loves trying to find as many different ways of saying the same thing and looking at like it from all of these different sides to make sure that they can understand the thing. And that was kind of an incredible class where we would either do like one day we would come in and he would have some like skin, like goat skin and like some cardboard and stuff, and go, we're going to build instruments today. People should know how to build instruments. If there's an apocalypse and like none of the other instruments survive, we still need to like be able to do things. And so we all built like a little drum and learned about how you heat the goat skin to like make it like stretch out a bit or compress. And then we would learn like either a khayal song or like some shape note singing, or like a simple like round where everyone would like canonize it or like kind of start at different points. And each time he would teach us a thing, he would teach it in a different way. Like once melody first, once lyrics first, once he would just keep singing the same thing and you just join on and keep like latching onto it. And it was almost like a primer on like all of the stuff musicians don't think about when they first started learning things, and a whole bunch of things that people don't talk about. Like we looked at just intonation stuff, but in the most like fundamental way, where he got like ropes and we were like swinging them, and then you would hold the rope in the center and see how like the one big wave that was going split into two small waves. So you're like standing in a field with a bunch of other students, seeing actual musical partials being divided in the ropes. And we filmed it in slow motion and saw like all of these perfect like kind of nodes in a vibrating string.
This is happening during your undergrad program in Scotland.
This is the master's course in Boston at the New England Conservatory.
And the undergrad you chose to do in jazz, but you chose Scotland instead of going the general way where, you know, mostly when we think music education, especially going from India, we go to MI or we go to Berkeley. Those are the most known. Any particular reason you chose to go to Scotland? Was the faculty something that you wanted to study with, or somebody you knew there? What was the reason?
I mean, there's always many reasons. Some of them musical, some of them financial. Like, I feel like the biggest thing for me in Scotland was they gave me a full ride plus housing plus flights back home, which was like the most insane deal for 4 years. And that was because they had this thing called the ABRSM scholarship, which was, the school was part of the ABRSM Associated Board of Royal Schools thing, and one international student in each school each year gets this thing. And the jazz course in Scotland was very new. I was in the second year ever over there. Only 1 year above us. There were only 6 students in each year, one for each instrument. Like one saxophone player, one trumpet player, bass, drums, guitar, piano. And so each year was effectively like a band that went in and you did things. But for me, that was obviously the money part of it is huge. Like, should I spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to Berkeley? Or at that point, I wanted to go to the New England Conservatory because they had a course called Contemporary Improvisation, which was like not just jazz or free or world music. It was like, basically, you go there and if you have a unique idea of how you want to express yourself, and they basically give you critical support and make you explore a whole bunch of different things and form all of these links between different styles of music. Scotland was a jazz course, and in retrospect, it was a very Berkeley-styled jazz course in a way, where most of the teachers who were teaching there went to Berkeley. We had like chord scales and arpeggio class and all, but on top of all of that, the guy who ran the course, Tommy Smith, he was a super like strong like personality, in a almost like this kind of like jazz god type way, where like I remember he made one student do push-ups when he played the wrong chord scale over, or if he couldn't justify what chord scale he's playing over a tune. We got in a bunch of arguments where I want to play more like dissonant things, and he's like, what's the justification? What mode are you borrowing from? And I was like, I don't care. And it came down to the point where I recorded a song of mine at the end of the course, and I had an F sharp over an F major chord, and he was like, that doesn't sound good. And I was like, I think it sounds good. And he was like, in 20 years, we're going to meet and you're going to either tell me that I was right or you're going to still be wrong. It's like, it's my tune. Like, I like that note over there. And I came in the next day to the like recording studio, and he pitch shifted the note in my tune on the trombone part. But he was also the kind of guy where if you didn't get anything, speaking of good teachers, he would stay for 3 hours after class, like glaring down at you, making sure you got the thing. He gave us all of these classes that the university didn't approve of, like, because they thought it was too much workload, and the funding and all was like all the bureaucratic stuff that goes on. But he, out of his own time, he would give us music, like calligraphy classes. And the entire first year, you had to write everything with the fountain pen on a sheet of paper, because he was like, that's a useful skill to have. He would give us music business classes for 4 years, even though technically we were only supposed to get it in the last year. He made us all build our own websites on his domain, where he made secret pages for us, taught us how to use WordPress. We were told we wouldn't graduate first year if we didn't have resumes and bios and writers, which again, he wasn't allowed to tell us. He can't graduate us for that. He's like, don't test me. I will fail you if you don't have the shit together.
These are very critical things to have, no, for an artist altogether. Because if you don't show your work, you don't get discovered. And if you don't get discovered, you don't get work. And you don't get work, you don't get money. And it's like a thing we all need to have. The value of this I'm understanding, started understanding only a few years ago, because I was very shy about putting any content out. Now I'm sitting here talking to you, creating more content for people to consume, and it's very helpful. So the aspect of justifying what is being played is something you mentioned when I attended your workshop you did for Live Demi. Live Demi, they call it Live Demi.
I think they say Live Demi.
Live Demi? I think they didn't get the domain, maybe that's why it's Live.
Yeah, I don't know what that's about, because I said Live Demi by mistake in the first workshop I did with them. And
yeah, so a Live Demi.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's called Live Demi. Amazing platform, guys, to check out. So there you said that the concept of being able to play what you hear without justifying it, like the greats used to do, and supporting the energy that you want to create while soloing as a musician is very important. So don't think about the justification. Think about the spice the notes add to a certain chord. Think about how it's going to change the environment of the room. How is it going to make people feel? How is it going to make you feel? Vasundhara and I put out a duo recently, and she transcribed a guitar solo, and it's beautiful love. So there's a G minor 7 flat 5, and somebody's played a B over it, and not just once, like again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it's working, but it's not justified, because the chord is ringing really sharp, loud. It's very clearly a G minor 7 flat 5, and there's a B ringing very hard. And then she kept on saying that this doesn't sound right to my ear, but it sounds correct as an emotion.
Yeah.
But the guitar player who played it, I don't know who played that solo, he didn't have to answer to anybody, but it works because it resolves well to the next section. So your approach of, first of all, you mentioned that when you improvise, you think of a ball of energy. You can increase that ball of energy, you can decrease that. So before you make others feel anything, you have to be clear about what are you feeling exactly, right? As an individual. That how does playing a sharp 11 over a major chord make you feel? What happens to that ball of energy? I want you to talk me, or rather, take me through this where you started discovering this process for yourself. How did you first understand that I need to start thinking of chords as colors, and then what did you practice exactly to start affecting the energy in your soloing, to start affecting the emotion? What was that exactly for you that you said, okay, if I start approaching my practice in this specific manner, I'll be approaching energy, not scales, not chords?
I mean, I don't think this is my idea. There's a lot of people that think about energy when they're playing, and like particularly when you get into kind of more free improvisation, it's just like textures and energies and like balancing all of these different things. But a lot of these processes when you're actually playing is like subconscious, and you just like that's why it's easier to think subconsciously about energy and growing a thing, or like reducing a thing, or splitting a thing, or like making it more jagged, or making it more like these kind of like other descriptive terms, rather than going sharp 11 this and all of that. And it's just, I guess the first foray of me thinking about this was at it in Scotland, where my teacher was talking to me about Kenny Werner and how he would just like, he had this thing where he would just like completely leave the changes and just start playing lines and shapes, and the hand would go, and then at some point he would like slide back into the changes. And I remember thinking at that point, this is kind of huge. I didn't know you were allowed to do that, because of the other people in the course who were like, you have to justify every single note that was happening. And then the more I kind of started listening to more free musicians like Cecil, or I don't know, there's like a huge like Matthew Shipp and like Matthew Bourne, and like all of these different free pianists and things. It was like, it doesn't matter at all whether like it's your choice whether you want to stick to the changes. It's your choice what kind of rules and forms you want to set for yourself. The only thing is there must be rigor in whatever you're putting out, like, because when you first like think of free music, it sounds like a bunch of noise, and it can be very exciting, or it can be very like unnerving or dissonant and things. And it's still one of these super like gray areas in terms of, there's days where I feel like it's so beautiful. It like one of my favorite things to do is to play free and use jazz tunes freely. And then there's other days where I was like, no, I want to play as traditionally as I can. And
so knowing both is important then, I think, in that sense, that you should be able to free yourself up rather than constantly thinking chord scale, arpeggios, this particular syncopation. Just free yourself up, and you can tie yourself back to the rules.
There's a difference between like the craft portion of it and the artistic portion of what you're playing. And the craft portion is the arpeggios and the chord scales, because when you do practice those arpeggios, you get to know what it really feels like and sounds like to play with those things. And it can sound incredible. When you play really free over thing, you get to like find all of these new shapes and things, and you start thinking more like geometrically in terms of like taking one little fragment, and like that was kind of like Ornette's whole thing, from what I understand, was like taking a really simple musical phrase that's usually either like bluesy or like very Charlie Parker inspired, but being able to like take it to all of these different tonalities and really like play around with it like in the most creative way, like fragmenting it, adding things at the end, and not being like tied down by the harmony of what's going on, because so much of that was time, no changes. It's just pure melody and pure expression in terms of that. And again, I'm not the biggest like expert on Ornette's music. Like I studied a little bit with a person called Joe Morris, who is an amazing free jazz guitarist, and he was the one who we listened to a bunch of Ornette together, and I was like, this is incredible, but I still haven't like done the task that everyone needs to do when they talk about someone, is like sit down, dig in, listen to like all of the records, like really try and figure out what's going on. But what I did get from the little bit that I did listen to him is that feeling of you don't have to care about the changes if you don't want to. So your whole thing is taking these standards and making them your own.
But is there a factor that ties it together though? Because if we leave it too free, because There's no rhythmic resolutions to it, let's say. There's no storytelling happening, right? Do you think about at least keeping something alive, some element of music which ties it all together?
I mean, the free playing, if you do it with rigor and you do it with like nuance and think about it, there's a lot that ends up tying it together. And I feel like Ornette seems like he's one of the best storytellers. He's just not like, you can set your own rules for how you're doing this. Just because a solo is free doesn't mean it doesn't have very strict proportions in terms of what's happening over there. There'll still be like peaks and lulls and all, and it's just a lot of the times people get unnerved in jazz music now when a solo doesn't go like this. If it doesn't go like that they're like, oh, I didn't hear what happened, because it's like, it's the same thing in like if you see a movie where it doesn't like lead to the final climax right at the end, and it kind of like gives you a different perspective where it starts off climatic and it like comes down, and you're like, oh, I don't know if they like paced that well enough. But it's like this, all of those little curves and bumps can be as rich if you're like, or as surprising to listen to, or as involving, and the chords are just one little part of something that you can follow in order to get that tune.
So the thing is, free up yourself, and then of course there's the aspect of getting it comfortable enough to be able to create that sense of energy and energetic shift, energetic change, by either following the rules or not following the rules.
Yeah, it's also like we get into dangerous territory when we talk about like following and not following rules, because whose rules are they? Like what the bebop guys were doing over the tunes was completely not following the rules based on the swing people. And also if you think of jazz as like this kind of like swing led to bebop, bebop led to hard bop led to like modal jazz, and that led to like this. Like it isn't one straight line. It's like a big circle and continuum of everything developing at the same time, and different people talking, and a lot of musicians also not seeing themselves as in a certain era or one certain thing. That's like for us in jazz history classes to look back and go, oh yeah, he was the pioneer of this. Like Monk as a bebop pianist, or Ellington said, I don't play jazz. Ellington said, I play Ellingtonia. It's like,
this is some curiosity I had about asking you, actually, studying history of a certain style of music. How has it impacted your playing directly? Let's say if you learn something specific about an era of music, how piano used to behave during a certain year of when humans lived. Can you draw a direct relationship where you know that, okay, this is the relationship I draw from this knowledge of history, and it impacts my playing in this specific manner?
I mean, maybe not in like so like well crafted a way, but there's a lot that, so I mean, we can talk about like examples, like people like James P. Johnson or Jelly Roll Morton and things. Like what in particular what Jelly Roll was doing is like these kind of like constantly like winding melodic lines using like pentatonic notes and things. It wasn't arpeggios, and it was just like the same thing kind of like circling around and around in each other with accents that made things like jump out. And that for me was like a texture that was like, oh, that's kind of like minimalist music. Like reminds me of Terry Riley. And then like say listening to Ellington stuff, the biggest thing that I got out of that was the piano as an orchestral instrument. Like all of his solo piano playing sounds like a big band, where he's using like register all the way up there. The chords have all of this like crunch and like all of these like different kind of things that come into it. The low notes feel like huge kick drum like things, and there's a huge feeling of like space and like what's the right word for it, like succinctness in how he plays piano, succinctity, or like just very carefully putting the right thing in the right register to keep this like I don't even know how to describe like what that does, but it's just like so rich in every way, the way that he plays piano, and not overdone. Unless it needs to be overdone for a section, then it'll like calm down.
So the aspect of, let's say, knowing about bebop as a part of your history studies, then does it inspire you, give you a seed that, hey, they broke the rules, I can also do the same? Is it those kind of impacts that they have, that you start drawing parallels between that time of history and then what you're living right now?
Yeah, I mean, everyone broke the rules when they made anything. That's the whole part of it. And there's like there was a really cool podcast I listened to a while back where this Irish guy called Blind Boy Boatface, who's he wears a plastic bag on his head. He's part of this like kind of spoof band called the Rubber Bandits, who are hilarious. But he started a podcast where he just talks about stuff for 2 hours and like goes down all of these different trains of thoughts. And he was talking about this thing in DNA cells that's like called I forget, it was called like a meme, but like a meme in the earlier sense, like not a meme as in the funny thing that you see, but like a meme variation or something, where I'm sure if someone actually knows about this, they can like correct me on what it is, but hopefully the concept of it is clear. It's like the exact cell that mutates in order to like evolve the species. Like the one cell that like changes in order to like take something new into account, and then that starts multiplying. And he looked at Black Sabbath, the song Black Sabbath by the band Black Sabbath on the album Black Sabbath, as the birth of metal, and put a historical context to it of it's like Birmingham and like post-war and all the bombs falling and all of that. That's when these kids grew up, and then they're like older, and that like darkness and gloom and big industrial sounds is over there. And then he linked that to like the Italian futurist movement from earlier on, where they were like, humans bad, machines good, like cars should rule everything, and music is going to be all metal sounds and machinery sounds and reflect those kind of like industrial surroundings. And like that kind of stuff I really love thinking about, of like that one band or one person who like takes these things that are like respectful of where they're coming from, and then like strives to like make a new thing, but it isn't like done as a marketing tool, as like I'm going to take jazz and Irish music and mix it together and do a thing, but it's more of like, this is something that is the sum of who I am and my experiences. And if I label myself only as a jazz musician, I'm being untrue to this huge other part of myself, and does the hard work of like fighting and making those things actually meet together to create a new thing.
You got to believe in what you want to do. And of course, there's this, what you're mentioning is correct, that there's this belief that if I combine this together as an individual, something new is going to happen. But it's personal love also, right? He's attracted, he or she, whoever the artist is, attracted to a certain idea, and then they make it happen for themselves.
Yeah, and we all love a lot of different things, but we don't necessarily reflect a lot of those different things in everything that we put out, because that's kind of an impossible and insurmountable challenge to do that.
But because we are also trying to go by the book at times, that we need to play certain things correctly before we start making our own decisions. But I think they can run simultaneously. Like while you study jazz, you can also create what you really, really want to create. You don't have to stop yourself to finish and cross some finish line and then, step into the territory of creating anything. Because music, I was just thinking that music is mostly coming from your environment, which is not necessarily that you're creating more music by being inside music all the time. It's just this analogy that you mentioned, the industries, the sound, the environment. And it's always come from somewhere else to express itself in this art form. And what we get stuck in is, I was stuck in this a lot, that I was always trying to be a better musician just by going too deep into music and trying to, look for some aha moment inside. Yeah, it's there. It's going to support you in some way. But if you really want to create something meaningful, you want to absorb your surroundings, absorb your decisions and beliefs, and then express them through the art form that you understand yourself, which is music, or it can be anything else.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely the way that I like thinking about it. But I know a lot of musicians who like their job or what they get out of music is like, everyone has like these different levels inside themselves. And it's not like one person is linked to one particular thing. But a friend of mine, actually my roommate right now, we were talking a few years back, and this is one of those like 2 a.m. sitting on the porch conversations where he didn't drink, but I'd like had a few whiskeys, and we were like talking, and he was like telling me, he's like, I realized that like the three ways that I'm thinking about like different levels of how you get satisfaction as a musician can be split into like these marketing kind of terms. It's like design thinking, artistic thinking, and scientific thinking. And obviously, with any time you come up with these generalizations, there's 1,000 holes to poke in them, but it still is helpful for me to think about this, where design thinking is when you make a product or make music that is supposed to satisfy a certain like need by the audience or the consumers. Or a client. Yeah, exactly. And you have to like, the success of making that is completely dependent on whether it fulfills their role and gives them what they need. Scientific thinking is when you have a very strong tendency of, what if this works? Can I find what would happen if I put these things together? What happens if I make a 12-tone raga? What happens if I like play like autumn leaves in like Lakshmi Tal or something, or what happens if I take every single note of Rag Yaman but turn it into a chord, so I'm effectively improvising using 7 chords rather than 7 notes in Yaman, and try to follow all of the rules of the things. Like that's all scientific kind of thinking, where the satisfaction comes from doing it, seeing what the result is, and then thinking about the result. And you feel like, I remember doing that with Yaman, and I was like, oh, this is great. Now I know it's not that good an idea, but I'm so happy that I did it. And then artistic thinking is when you're just leave everything else, you're just trying to do your own thing. And none of these exist in absolutes. It's always like a balance between these things. I feel like for me, the artistic thinking has always been at the forefront, and then you like have those like 2 weeks of like really going for it, going, yeah, this sounds great, I'm so happy with this. And then you think about it, like, who's actually going to listen to this? What is this meant for? Why am I creating music in a vacuum? What purpose is it going to serve the community or society in general? And am I wasting my entire life? And then one person says they like it, and it's like, oh, I guess maybe that's worth it, but is one person enough for this? And being a musician is always these thoughts coming again and again into your head, and then just persevering through it.
It's quite messy. I mean, however much we try that we want to organize this, it is messy. There are some things which can be organized, some steps that you can go through. But then when the individual starts thinking, starts worrying, starts questioning, then it starts becoming messy. But again, I think what I hear from you is these thoughts I also go through a lot of times. And these are messy thoughts, but you can sit down and pick the ones you want to pick and then leave the rest behind. Same with ideas also, because musicians are always getting ideas. There's no end to it if you let that door open. Of course, you can stop it, that you can tell yourself, no, I can't sing this melody right now because I'm studying jazz. So you can put it away like that. But the truth is that you have ideas all the time. The only decisions that an artist is making is which ones to keep, which ones to put aside for the time being or forever. So when you are creating your content or you're creating your music, are you very much aware about, does this bring value to the listener? Does the listener feel anything? Are you always thinking in those terms?
I try to sometimes. I didn't for a long time, and then I realized there's an imbalance in that. So I should consciously try and think about that. And what generally ends up happening is, like, if I try and think about what a listener would like, and I get to what I think a listener would like, somewhere in the process, it ends up getting like stressed by my own need to or mutated by my own need to experiment. And then I'll go like, here's the poppiest thing I've ever written. And it's like, this is not poppy. Like, this is far. But that's also the other thing. It's like, I remember having a chat with one of my teachers about this, Anthony Coleman, and he was like, oh, you have to read this book by Le Corbusier about a housing project that he made in France. And I forget what the book was called. It's over here somewhere.
It's the same architect who inspired you in terms of music, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, so this was the book that kind of made me like really think about him. And I think it's called Lived in Architecture, I think, where he made these low-cost houses where he wanted to specify. He was convinced that these houses would be built so that they could satisfy the listeners or the people who live in there, their need, and improve their life in every way possible. And he wanted to design how they're going to live and make houses so that they can only live his particular way, which was better for them. Which is kind of how we think about, I'm going to make music that's going to make you feel happy because I have sat and trust me, and I'm like smart and a genius, and I'm going to make you feel happy by making this thing. And what ended up happening was everyone just broke walls and made it their own, and it ended up being one of these incredibly modular apartment designs, which was completely a failure in terms of his thinking, but also a very well-loved, ahead of its time kind of way of designing apartments. And that makes me like think in my head, like, who am I to tell people how to use my music or try to like predetermine how it would be used? It's always, all this ambiguity is always there. Like two things fighting: the need to control how your music is going to be used, the need to like want to prove to yourself that you are being of service to the community by like providing them with like specific concrete emotions when they're listening, and then the like knowing at the back of your head you have no idea how someone's going to interpret any of this, and all you can do is hope that they get something that's personal to them out of listening to it.
So the joy is in creating, and you shouldn't stop creating, I believe, and then let people kind of figure it out. Whoever are your people are going to connect with it anyways, right?
Yeah, it's messy. And it's nice to also see how like all of these things, like how it actually ends up playing out.
Yeah.
And it's like almost trying to do a thing with knowing that it can't be done. That's what my new thing has like kind of come to, like, we're dealing with this. I'm going to try to do it, and I know it's not going to work, but me trying to do it is going to affect the thing that I'm doing in some way anyway. And let's see where that happens. Where that takes us.
Yeah. Do you have any jazz albums out as a piano player?
No,
right?
nothing. I mean, there's like some stuff from undergrad where like there was a compilation album where I had a track and then a couple of things, but I'm working on these pieces now where the deadline for me is 20 years down the line, which is kind of what we were talking about with putting things together and finding your own personal voice, because all of my heroes are people who are like so true to all of their loves and their life, in terms of making music that really transcended some boundaries, but not in a way where you sat down, had a good idea, worked on it for a couple of weeks, and then put it out. And the goal for this is taking 6 or 7 huge inspirations, thinking about them, and improvising things, recording the improvisations, slowly letting it shift over the next 20 years. Recording more, discarding some, bringing them back, keeping all of them together on one folder, and seeing it really, really slowly in an unforced way develop over the things. And my plan with that is to try and put records out every 2 years that are just snapshots of the process. And that's almost like a personal exploration. So those will be records that I don't want to publicize or anything. It's just it'll go up. You want to listen. It's part of a much longer process.
Yeah, this sounds interesting. So then putting out, you have a lot of classical albums where you're playing Hindustani classical music on piano. Was this a choice you made that I'm going to showcase my artistry, especially when it comes to recorded music, in terms of being a Hindustani classical piano player? Because if I search the internet right now, the first thing that I get to understand about you, I know you in person. I've played with you many, many times. So I know the spectrum of your playing. But the showcase on the internet, or whenever I look for your name on the internet, is that you're a Hindustani classical piano player. Was it a conscious choice to portray yourself exactly as that?
All right. So the main reason why most of what I put out as an Indian classical musician is because that's kind of always been my primary goal in what I want to do as a musician. And I've interacted with this goal at many different levels. When I was a kid, I liked Indian classical music because I found out I could improvise. And for me, that was huge because I was playing Bollywood songs. I was learning from a man called Brian Silas. I was playing Western classical, which at that time I hated because I did not like sight reading and I didn't like the pieces. And Indian classical music was oh, I can make my own music using a scale. That's great. And I really liked that thing. And then the more I actually learned about it, made a ton of mistakes, did concerts where people were this is not Ragyaman, this is something else, you need a guru, and then found a bunch of different people to study with, and then finally found my guru. It was this constant evolving process of, hang on, this is a really dumb idea to play this music on this instrument. It's the worst instrument in order to do all of the things that I love about Indian music and now realize are happening in Indian music that I didn't hear at the start. And that changed to this kind of almost a masochistic kind of goal of, I loved playing things that aren't meant for the piano so much on the piano and working on those challenges that I found that it was the kind of catalyst for me to find my own way of playing this instrument. And working on trying to get gamaks and means and really explore within a few certain notes and go as into detail with them with Indian music, where I take 20-second recording of Tagore Brothers, a 20-second recording of Ali Akbar Khan, and go, I want to get this as closely as I can. And it's never going to be the same thing because I can't bend, I can't do those things. But working on that helped me develop my own personal way of jazz language. And I love listening to that form of music so much. For me, still, that's the biggest source of satisfaction. In terms of putting music out, though, which is a different thing from what you're working on, I don't think I would have put out any Indian classical records, even to this date, if I hadn't already put my first one out when I was younger, where there was a lot of things that, my mom was always super involved in promoting and organizing concerts and shows and taking me to lessons and things. And she came from a marketing background, and she knew that this is something that would be really good for like college applications and stuff. And plus I like playing piano. I didn't have to be forced into it. So the fact that that one record was already out there, that was done when I was 16, made it so much easier to like just go, all right, records aren't your first definitive statement on what you're doing. It's like records are just little snapshots in a much longer process. Gigs are just little snapshots in a much longer process. And the much longer process is when you're 85 years old and you know you still have a long way to go, is looking back at all of the things that have come out and go, I can see progress, I can see thought process, I can see development in it. And I kind of really like thinking about things that way. The reason why I didn't put out any jazz or free records was because in my head there hadn't been enough personal rigor involved with them until now, where I feel like I'm starting to really focus on finding my own way of doing these things. It felt like in terms of jazz, there wasn't those like, there were a lot of hours of trying to get the craft concepts of the arpeggios and the scales, and like learning how Kenny Werner plays outside and learning how like Cecil plays outside and transcribing monk tunes and stuff like that. But it wasn't so much of me sitting with tunes and thinking about what do I want to say with this and what do I want to share with it. Yeah, and finding like a personal way. It always felt like, because there's more of a tradition in that, and because there's also so many like jazz piano records out with people doing really creative and wonderful things, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. So I was happy to play gigs, I'm happy to like experiment on my own, but putting out a record made it like, it was almost like I haven't taken that first step yet. And it was very compartmentalized with the Indian classical records, where I'm trying to be as traditional as possible while knowing I'm being completely non-traditional because it's a piano. But the jazz was like sort of compartmentalized outside in my head, and which is why this new process of just improvising and like not worrying about whether it's Indian music or jazz or minimalism or folk or things is like the thing that's giving me enough like mental strength to go, yeah, there has to be a record of this by the end of the year. It will be where it's at. And there's like, as you said, there's tons of ideas. There's always like 30 different ways of making this record. Currently, the one that I'm thinking about is recording on a bunch of different pianos in different locations using remote recording gear, and then like sitting and trying to like compile it into like these like many different improvisations coming together on one record on different instruments and different sounds and different spaces. That feels like a more personal way to make an album to me than writing a bunch of tunes and going into the studio with a band to record it, because
sounds lovely. I mean, because then it becomes real, and when it becomes real, then it makes people feel stuff. It's just like that. And I think you're just waiting for that exact voice to translate to your instrument and then making it happen. What's going on in your head should exactly come out and should be new, should be fresh. The piano aspect, which I wonder, at times there is a tanpura playing with your piano and at times it's not playing. So the piano is tuned to an equally tempered scale, right? So it's not really in tune with the rag. When you're sitting down to do a concert, let's say somewhere abroad where people don't understand the nuance of the microtones that needs to be present exactly in terms of tuning on an instrument, do you have a piano tuner who tunes in a certain key for you, specific key, that if you will play, let's say, in the key of D flat, then Bhagyashree is going to sound absolutely in tune? Or do you let the piano be on an equally tempered scale and just work your way around with whatever is present there?
I mean, so microtonality in Indian music is a pretty messy concept as far as I understand. I made a record on this instrument called the fluid piano.
Yeah, Jeffrey Smith.
A few years back. Yeah, exactly.
He made it, yes.
And that was the first time I really had to confront this, because I'd heard a lot of just intonation tuned pianos before and all, but I didn't really think about doing that myself until I played the fluid piano. I always said that's something we'll come to at a later stage, and that was the advice that I was given as well by some people, saying, yeah, you should learn how to tune the piano, but first like get the bhav of the rag into your head. And I didn't feel like I was that convinced by me knowing the bhav of the rag. And when I did the fluid piano album, it was more of this research process of, all right, 22 shrutis, great. Let me go and talk to everyone and record the conversations. And then I go and speak to people, and I was like, can you show me all the 22 shrutis that are there? And then they would play like 35 notes in an octave. And I was like, wait, you just played 35. And then they'd be like, oh, look, 35 shrutis. I can play even more than 22. It's like, that's not how this works. And there's this big, like divide between the academic way of thinking about these shrutis. And I was reading like the Datilam and Natya Shastra and all, and there's like some process in that where you get the 22 shrutis by like matching strings on like one of the ancient like string instruments and like tuning it perfectly so there's no beats.
You cut it in the middle, then there's a whole process of cutting into two halves, then more halves, and then it starts producing certain sounds.
Yeah.
I read about it when I was in college.
That was, because you did Hindustani Khayal, right?
College? I did music honors in Hindustani classical music. So that's where I remember it from. But anyways, continue. This is interesting what you're telling me.
So the people that I really respected when I was talking about this, they're like, 22 shruti is fine, whatever it is. Depends on what you're trying to convey. Like those shrutis will be different whether you're going up, whether you're coming down, what the audience is like, what the place is like, what temperature it is, whether it's monsoon or spring. All of that, like, don't worry about that. Think about the rag. Think about singing the rag. Think about like learning and understanding it. And so I basically went for the most kind of universally agreed ratios of the shrutis when I was making the fluid piano record, and like tuning it with piano tuners and measuring like all the ratios and making little marks on the sliders of the instrument. And for those who don't know what the fluid piano is, it's an instrument where it's an acoustic piano where you can like use sliders to bend either a semitone up or a semitone down. So total range of a bend is a tone, which is anyway restrictive for Indian music. And when I was playing, I was trying to be conscious of bringing the sliders back to the same place. And then eventually I was like, no, like let that be the starting place. And then I'm just going to play and use my ears to make it sound good. I had 5 days to get used to the instrument. Actually, 3 days to get used to it.
That's hard, because when I was seeing you play, I could see that this is not muscle memory right now. You're very aware of how much to bend the note, and just 3 days, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I checked it out once in 2009, where it was lying in a warehouse, and then 2015 was when we got funding for me to go over to the UK. I had 3 days in this beautiful church in the countryside where they agreed to host the piano, and I had a key to the church. And I would just spend like from 6 a.m. in the morning till like 1 or 2 at night playing the instrument, trying different things. And the month before, I remember just sitting with a pitch bend on a keyboard or playing my piano and imagining how it works. Because it's also like few things to get used to on that instrument. If you want to bend from D to E, you have to play an E flat and have the slider at the bottom position and then take it up, because it's only a semitone.
Right.
each way. So
Right.
there were all of these little things that I had to like think through, and then you go, and as with anything that you only work out in theory, there's some things that don't work like you expected them to, and there's a lot of new things that work that you didn't even think about. But I don't know, like reflecting on playing the flute piano, while it was very fun and an incredible experience, it's a different instrument. It's not like a piano that can also bend notes. It's like its own thing. It's built on like early piano making, like forte piano craftsmanship. Like the sound is different, the action is different, the register is different.
Do the keys feel stiff? Is the hammer a little harder than the other regular pianos?
No, it's the keys are very light. The hammer is the hammer isn't felt. The hammer was wood, which was leading to a big, like kind of very sharp sound, like almost harpsichord like. But we got a little bit of felt put on the hammer, which made the volume go down a lot. Because the main thing is the volume goes down because the string tension is lower, which is what helps you move the sliders. And they got rid of the felt so that it would be loud enough to actually play in concert. But when you're recording, we didn't have to worry about that. So we, especially for this recording, we got a layer of felt installed on
Layer
the
of
instrument. Felt.
Felt. Okay.
Yeah. But it's still a different instrument. Like it's not a piano. And I have a piano over here which I'd used in the workshop, which I got for $50, which I have done a lot of experiments on in terms of tuning according to the rugs. Like most of the time it's not even in equal tempo tuning, mostly because it doesn't hold its tuning. But
Are you
also
sticking
because,
to a key though when you're playing classical music, Hindustani classical?
yeah, D. So that's the thing. You have to stick to one key. Or if you want to be really ingenious, you can figure out a way that if you're doing a concert which has 3 or 4 rags and they all have different shrutis that you use, then you like choose those rags carefully and tune each note carefully before the concert so that it doesn't take that long to tune. Maybe you might have to tune one note a couple of cents down, and usually I don't go over the entire register of the piano. I kind of stick to the registers that like voice or sitar or something would do, which would be like 3 octaves, maybe a little bit more, like at the absolute maximum.
Right.
But in concert and most recording situations, I'm not allowed to retune the pianos. And venues aren't particularly happy about that. Recording studios are not happy about it at all because it does destabilize it if you're like moving it around. Plus, I'm not good enough at tuning to be able to convince them that I can put it back or to let me do that. But that is something that I've been working on and learning how to tune. And
so the organ style, like on a MIDI controller, you have those faders. Do you think it can be mapped to the same kind of liquid piano kind of alterations to the note? Have you tried that out ever?
On like just software instruments?
Yeah, on like your regular MIDI controller, we have faders on the top, right?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't tried pitch bending using them, but what I've tried doing is either using the actual pitch bend thing, but
Yeah.
in a bunch of DAWs you can like program different, like you can get each note to sound like whatever you want it to. So I would make like if I want to play like, I don't know, like I want 2 different intonations of D. One D a little bit closer to C because it's like, I'm thinking of D right now as Re. So one Re closer to Sa and one Re closer to Komal Ga. So I can just change the intonation of that and make the D flat a D natural that's closer to Sa and the actual D D that's closer to E. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of like subtler ways of doing this too, because if when you like, this is like one of the things, instruments aren't just one, you don't just get one frequency out of a piano when you play it. Like you have all of these different overtones, and the way that you attack it also changes the perceived pitch. If I play a note softer, it sounds flatter. If I play a note sharp, then you see the curve where it's like has that attack makes it sharper, and then it like slows down. And each piano has these different kind of things. And also, depending on what you're holding at the bottom, makes your ear perceive it differently. If I'm holding two low D octaves and I play an F sharp, and I'm conscious of how the F sharp is going to blend with those D octaves at the bottom, my ear will hear that F sharp lower, because more complex things that go into your ear get like constructive interference will happen, and also your ear will like automatically translate that to an easier whole number ratio of sound that's coming in.
When I was recording this duo with Vasundhara, playing a walking line on. So first I did it on my 4-string. It's a Squire bass. The action tends to be kind of slightly high most of the times. The build of the instrument is very different, right? It's a budget bass, so the hardware used is different. To get a sound out of it, you have to hit the string harder. It's a passive bass, so of course it changes the way the note is going to be heard and perceived. No, in a band situation, it's good that you're playing with the whole band. Then a collective overtone kind of is formed, that we understand that this is the sound of C major, this is the sound of D major, blah blah blah. So when I was doing this with her only as a duo, again the same thing would happen, that I'll play G on my Squire, but to her it'll end up in a slightly flatter place because I'm hitting the string harder and it's vibrating in a different manner, and the end result is a slightly flatter or a sharper note, whatever it would be according to the attack done to the instrument. Then I had to switch to my 6-string, which is a much more expensive bass. It's got much more sensitive electronics. I don't have to attack so hard. It's slightly different the way that instrument behaves, and when you invest that much into an instrument, it also takes care of the micro adjustments needed to be for the frets to be in the right place. And then after that is the fan fret system on the guitars and basses to make it sound even nicer. So when we did that with the 6-string, she could sing, she could perceive the pitch much more comfortably versus the one which was with the Squire. And it doesn't really, I mean, I'm not a person who says that one gear is better than the other, but this specific scenario was so strange that the end of the note that you're hearing, according to the way you touch it, is going to change everything. But then again, in Western culture, it's because harmonic, collectively it starts sounding correct. But in Hindustani culture altogether, it's so important for everything to be in this perfect kind of a scenario where it needs to sound exactly the way. Last thing I want to ask you, I know we've been about an hour. I'm just wondering, you do khayal style performance on piano, but you have studied with Wasifuddin Dagarji, and he's a Dhrupad singer himself. So have you ever thought about doing a Dhrupad Dhamar performance on piano?
I mean, I try to keep alap when I'm playing concerts to be a traditional alap Georgiala. And there's the way that I used to do it was earlier I used to follow mostly sitar and sarod styles. Like I'm a huge fan of Maihar Gharana players and do a lot of riyaz with people in New York in that style. But for me, the Dhrupad alap Georgiala is the most like perfect. I would love to do Dhamar and Chautal and all in concerts. The main thing has been I had not played live with a Pakhavich player till the last time I was in India, because there aren't that many Pakhavich players.
Yes.
And it's not the same with like chautal or dhamar on tabla. Like you don't get that like feeling. But that's kind of, I would love to build towards where I'm doing more Dhrupad composition parts as well. Or maybe having both aspects of that, like alap jorjhala, dhamar or chautal, and then maybe doing like a chota khayal type thing towards the end.
When a Rudra Veena performs and a rag is played on a Rudra Veena, that's a proper dhamar played, right? Or is it again in the same style of a sitar performance or a sarod performance?
No, the Veena is pretty authentic. I mean, Veena is amazing. And even on sitar, it can be like super authentic depending on who's playing it. And then there's a lot of problems with authenticity as a word of who defines that and how it's done, like who gets to decide what the thing was, because Indian music is constantly shifting and moving and changing, and with each generation there's new things being added, and in this age in particular, like everyone has access to every other style. So whether consciously or subconsciously, you're taking all of those things into account.
Yep.
Authenticity is kind of
it's mixed up. Because Faculty of Music, I witnessed so many Hindustani classical musicians. Some legends, some used to visit. And there used to be fights there all the time. I haven't seen so many fights. And especially related to music and superiority and whatnot. It was hilarious. One day somebody announced that sarod is harder than sitar. My God, what a day it was. What a day. And one day somebody said a Hindustani classical musician's name, and he didn't add a G after that. That was a war. It was interesting to be there, to witness that, all that sometimes as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old. But then, hell of an experience because, you know, sometimes people like Ajay Chakravarti ji will come and give a nice, beautiful demonstration about so many beautiful things. Then sometimes Pandit Rajan Sajan ji will come, they'll perform. And, you know, it's sad, Rajan ji just passed away.
Yeah.
And
it's a big loss.
It's a big loss. And just 3 days before that, I was sitting in my house listening to a nice, beautiful recording of Darbari sung by him. And 2-3 days later, I got to know that he's no more. But I think it's just a very difficult time for everybody to go through. It's a tough one. But man, Utsav, this has been lovely. I mean, I really want to talk to you much more about many more things, but I'll leave it for another time. I'm going to keep bothering you in a few months again, ask you, talk to us and talk to the listeners, to me, and discuss more about music. What's next though? What's coming out next? Is there something coming up? New album has just come out, February 2021.
Yeah, I have a couple of singles that are basically one outtake from the album, and then I was in the studio recently recording something for George Brooks, one of his pieces, and I ended up doing another couple of small recordings. I'm trying to be less like just put out something every couple of months in the spirit of what we talked about, of little snapshots, because it's that thing, every 2 weeks you're like listening back to what you did and going, well, I should have done it this way, and then you do it that way, and then 2 weeks later you're like, oh, I don't know about that. So it's like, might as well share that process with everyone else. If they want to listen, it'll be out there on Spotify and things. And I don't know, just keep working in small little steps towards a really far away and long goal.
Beautiful, man. Thanks a ton. And it was fun.
Really nice to talk to you.
I'm just stopping the recording. I'll keep the call on. Thank you guys for coming to the podcast. This was super fun, and I'll see you very soon. Maybe next week, maybe a little before that. Bye bye.